So 5 years ago, I purchased my first Panasonic camera, the GH5, and since then, Panasonic has just been pushing out new camera after new camera with incredible features, beautiful colors, rugged build quality, some of the best IBIS performance on the market, and they were literally just one feature away from being absolutely incredible. Autofocus, 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 and autofocus. So enter the new Panasonic S5II, which actually got a 1-minute standing ovation, not when they actually announced it, or when they showed specs like 6K 10-bit video or 30 frames per second raw bursts, or even like a sub $2,000 price. The ovation came with phase detection hybrid autofocus.
Phase hybrid contrast F.
That is, if they could actually deliver. So literally one day with this camera, and I can tell every Panasonic user is going to be a massive fan. I mean, autofocus is way better on this than any previous model. The video is just stunning. It's got a whole lot of features in it. Image quality, while not technically a big upgrade, is still unbelievable. And there's so much going for it at this price point. And the IBIS is just on another level from other cameras right here. So at first glance on this, the specs are absolutely insane for a sub $2,000 camera. So on the photo side, it is a 24 megapixel sensor, up to 30 frames per second in a raw burst mode, has a crazy 779 autofocus points, phase detection, and extremely well build quality, dual card slots, all of that. And then on the video side, it gets just even better. So you have 6K video up to 30 frames per second, 4K 60, all 10-bit, full-size HDMI ports, amazing IBIS performance, and active cooling for unlimited recording, which is important to me. Unfortunately, there are a few asterisks on quite a few things, so let's break them down real quick. So on the photo side, we have a 30 frames per second, which is only going to be an electronic shutter, which I absolutely expected. That's pretty par for the course. Unfortunately, the mechanical frame rates are just a bit slow. 7 frames per second with continuous autofocus, and that's not as good as I had hoped. So maybe things have improved a little bit with the electronic shutter, so I had high hopes that maybe our readout speeds in a 2023 camera would be incredibly fast. But no, you can still see some rolling shutter with fast-moving subjects. It's just not the quickest scan speeds on the market. That's pretty typical, but I hope to see some improvements in this, and I'm really not. Now on the video side, thankfully there's really only one major asterisk, and that's 4K 60 is going to be cropped. And I was definitely hoping for a full-frame 4K 60, even if we had to sacrifice over sampling like the other frame rates, but unfortunately it is only going to be available in a crop mode. So then I started thinking, okay, so what are the other full frame cameras out there below $2,000? I mean, compared to like a Sony A7 III and Nikon Z6, this is going to be better. And the newer cameras like the Sony A7 IV, the R6 II, they're gonna be a bit more expensive. So maybe what I really needed was just another awesome shoot to give this camera some life, so enter the Hummer EV. So I just got a Cajun from Condor Blue. This is it right here. They made it already, and the handle for it. Looks absolutely insane. I'll throw this on, give it a try. So let's get into this hardware because the camera is just built so incredibly well. I mean, the grip on this, very comfortable. Even my pinky fits the entire way. The viewfinder did get an upgrade, so we have 3.6 thousand dots on it. The back screen, not an upgrade, nothing crazy awesome here at 1.8 thousand dots, but still pretty solid quality for the price. The image actually looks pretty good. The only complaints I could really find is that it is very easy to accidentally switch, especially this thumb dial right on the back because it's so exposed in the corner. And there's not a lot of like new upgrades. So like no lockable dials and no quick switches between photo and video. You have to do it on the main dial right here, which is also not lockable. We also don't have like those dual tilt and flip screens like we've seen on cameras like the G8-6 and S1H. So what I love about this camera though is the customization. The menus might be a little bit clunky to navigate, but nothing you can't learn. And there is just an option for literally everything. There is so many ways to just gain quick access to controls that you don't even have on other cameras. And all together, this hardware and customization just makes this a really awesome camera to use. Now, the image quality on this, it's great, but we don't seem to be getting anything new as far as performance goes. So I would put this more in line with like older cameras like a Sony A7 III, Nikon Z6, but where Panasonic really helps win me over is with just the colors on this. And it's not like anything looks super stunning out of camera. I actually think that Panasonic tends to come off a little bit more neutral, but to me, that's a good thing because I have absolutely no issues pushing colors, pushing dynamic range, and I'm ending up with some really amazing images. All right, so now let's get into probably the most important question, and that is going to be autofocus. And really, it's just the most important question because it's the only area that Panasonic hasn't been on the same level as like Canon and Sony over the past few years. And honestly, I don't think that's going to change too much here. So first of all, the interface on this, it feels like a scene out of Top Gun. It's just like targets going all over the place. But the main takeaway for me is that it's inconsistent. Absolutely, there are times where it nails autofocus. You can definitely feel the phase detection is helping with tracking, especially things moving towards and away. But there are still times, and plenty of times, where it failed. The main one, anything that didn't have a ton of contrast was an issue. So also if your exposure was just too dark or too light, the camera would automatically have to change your exposure and focus before taking the shot. And this was just really jarring. I noticed it so much more. Typically on other cameras, you'd have to be at like -3 EV or something like that for that to happen. This camera is doing it all the time. It also seems to lack some of the intelligence of some newer cameras like the Canon R6II, Sony A7 IV. So like there's no AI autofocus. It's not going to eye autofocus on birds, for example. And even like the normal tracking modes just feel like a bit more manual, clunky process than what we've seen on some other cameras. Now, the good news is I think this hardware is finally capable of focusing extremely well, and it does it very often. It just still feels like it's maybe a first generation hybrid autofocus system, so it still needs some fine tuning with algorithms to be reliable, but I would still trust it way more than any other Panasonic camera on the market. To me, it just really feels very contrast dependent, and it also is just not quite the hit rate that I've seen on other cameras. Now, granted, not everyone needs autofocus, especially if you're a videographer where you might be using like cinema lenses, anamorphic lenses, vintage lenses. That's not an option anyway. But over the past like 5 years, autofocus systems have gone from good to near perfect. So I can shoot everything from sports and action, wildlife, fast cars, and portraits at f1.2. Even this video is going to be shot in autofocus and it will never miss. So it is something now that when you can get that performance, it is so awesome to be able to have it. Now, probably no surprise here, but video is definitely an area where this camera has some solid wins. So 6K video up to 30 frames per second in 10-bit, and you just have so many different frame rate options. You have resolution options, you have bitrate and codec options. Sony and Canon just don't match this. Plus you have control over your aspect ratio. So you have 16:9, 17:9, and 3:2, which is great for anamorphic, or if you want to reframe vertically in post, it can be really helpful for that. I'm also a huge fan of their color profiles, and honestly, color in general on the Panasonic is great, but V-Log, super easy to work with, and if you're not quite ready for shooting log, their flat profile is a really awesome starting place. You get enough room to do some really good looks on your grade, but still not enough that you really have to know what you're doing in order to get things right. Now, in low light, absolutely no issues here. It still looks awesome, probably because you have a dual native ISO in this camera. So you will see a bit of grain above 12,000 ISO, but it is definitely beating other cameras in this price range and really amazing looking at 6400 ISO. And I happen to live out in Florida where shooting weddings on a beach in open sunlight at 100+ degrees and full humidity is unfortunately a pretty common thing. So this camera has active cooling, and what's interesting is it's actually located over where the pop-up flash would be. You have some vents down in the front below the logo, and then on the side right here. And this supposedly gets you unlimited recording up to about 104 degrees by their spec. And in all my tests so far, this is working extremely well, even in the heat. They also have a new feature called a real-time LUT. And this basically allows you to load in a custom LUT, which you could always do, but instead of just getting a preview on the camera, now you can actually bake it into your footage. So when you get to a computer or look at your files, it's already graded with that LUT. And that could be massive for those of you pulling off like same day edits, you need something fast for like social, or this will even work with live streaming. So if you're doing that, you can get a perfect LUT loaded on this camera immediately for those live streams. And in true Panasonic fashion, you've got waveforms, you've got vector scopes, you've got zebras, 4-channel audio, synchro scan. I mean, this is just one of my absolute favorite cameras to shoot video with. And you combine that with just great ergonomics, build quality, amazing IBIS performance. And this is the best full frame video camera under $2,000 right now. And if that wasn't enough,
there's one more thing.
So enter the new Panasonic S5II, which is basically a blacked out version of this camera with some additional video features. Now, it won't be out until May, which is really the biggest issue with it. It's only $200 more though, which I thought was a great price, to the point where I asked Panasonic, I'm like, you guys could have charged more for this, maybe threw in a few new features, but it seems like the X is basically the same camera, just with some new codecs and licensing. So this is big though. You now get ProRes recording. You get 422 10-bit when using S&Q, whereas this camera was only 420 10-bit in S&Q. Also, you get all-eye compression up to 600 megabits per second internal. You get USB recording to an external SSD. You have raw recording video via HDMI output. I mean, in my mind, it is 100% worth it if you're a videographer to get all of that for $200 more. But it is nice if you're a photographer, just don't think that you're going to be using it. You still have this as an option for you, and you're not paying for all of those licensing fees that you're not going to be able to use. I just wish that camera wasn't going to have to wait until May to get it, because that's so long. And in the meantime, you have a decision to make. So let me know what you think. Do you get this camera right now, or are you waiting for that S5II with all of those new features on it? Now, if you're comparing this to the competition, so like newer cameras like a Sony A7 IV and R6II, those are going to be about $500 more expensive, but they do have some advantages, especially with frame rates and autofocus. Although Panasonic does have them beat with like 6K video, letting you pick different aspect ratios. And in the case of the S5II, getting ProRes recording and all kinds of stuff like that is absolutely amazing. On the flip side, like the sub $2,000 full frame cameras out there are they're a bit older right now for some reason. And the S5II really has some major wins in that category. So for me, if you're already a Panasonic shooter, this is absolutely an amazing camera. Yes, the autofocus isn't as reliable as I hoped. Hopefully it gets better with some firmware updates. We've had like 3 already. And the frame rates might keep me from recommending it for like sports and wildlife, but it is still going to be better than the Panasonic camera you're using now. And especially if you're a videographer, this is going to be an absolutely incredible option. But for a company, Panasonic, that has somewhere between 2 and 4% market share, I really think they need to do a little bit more than just keep Panasonic users from leaving. Ideally, they need to convince Sony and Canon users to jump ship, and I'm not sure that they pulled it off with this camera. To me, to do that, they really needed autofocus to be on another level, and it's not quite there for me. And they needed a few less misses, so maybe having 4K 60 full frame, at least 10 frames per second for like sports and wildlife shooters to not be left out. But for now, I would say 2 things. The S5II is definitely my favorite sub $2,000 full frame camera when video is a priority. especially with that 6K, the different aspect ratios, all of that stuff. And the second is Panasonic is one massive step closer to making this the camera to beat, and Panasonic's S1 series is due for an update. So let me know what you guys think about the S5II. Literally, I read every comment you guys leave, so hit me up if you guys have any questions. And I'm hanging out a lot over on IG, so you can see like BTS and all that kind of stuff of what I'm shooting. And there is some absolutely awesome stuff coming up next week. So subscribe, like if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys soon in a new video.